Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Beach House 34 True Crime and Paranormal podcast. I'm your host, Christine Worth. Now, today, what we're going to do is we are continuing with the Darlie Routier trial, and we're still on January 17th of 1997. And today, we continue with the testimony of Barbara Jovell. Now, the first portion of this episode will be a recap of what Barbara told the jury in the previous episode. We also learned that this first piece of testimony is actually where they ended up showing the silly string video, and that was played for the jury. Now, as mentioned before, Barbara's testimony is long, and so I'm going to be covering it in several episodes, and I'm going to get to them as fast as humanly possible. So with that said, let's first listen to what we learned in the last episode. First of all, we learned that she worked at Kuplex, this company where she originally met Darren, and this was around 1987. And at the time, he was 19 years old. Now, he and Darlie also at this time were engaged, and Darlie was around all of 16 or 17 years old. Barbara didn't actually end up meeting Darlie until a few months or even a little bit longer after she had first met and worked with Darren. And then Barbara and Darlie became friends. And actually, Barbara ended up being Darlie's maid of honor in her wedding. Now, Darlie, I guess, also worked at Kuplex, but she was pregnant at the time, had some kind of accident, and she wasn't able to work. So she stayed home after that. Darren and Darlie were then married in August of 1988. And during a little bit after this, from what I gather, Darren developed a business on the side as he was working at Kuplex. And this business was originally out of his home, and Barbara helped him with that. She was paid to help him. Darlie also helped, and Darren eventually left Kuplex and went to work for his own company, which he called Testneck. Now, Barbara, she too left Kuplex and went to work for Darren at Testneck. Darlie kept the books at this Testnet company, and Barbara and Darren worked on these circuit boards. She said that her daughter, Barbara's daughter, helped sometimes with the company, and someone also named Julie Clark. Barbara then began to testify about how she felt that Darlie was very materialistic. And Barbara, for some reason, brought this up to Darren. Barbara was concerned that Darlie was buying things all of the time. And, honestly, my first thought is, sorry, why is that her business anyway? So Barbara claimed that no money went back into the company. It just went to Darlie. They had also built a new home. Darlie decorated the home. She purchased furniture and, quote, beautiful clothes for her and her kids. And then Barbara talked about how Darlie liked to buy jewelry. Now, Barbara also talked to Darlie about everything that she was buying. And again, this just struck me as really weird. Anyway, in 1995, business started to get at Testneck started to get really slow for an extended period of time. And this was true through the next year into 1996. And she testified that during this time, Darlie started to get nervous and depressed and fought with Darren a lot. Evidently, they were frequent fights and arguments about money. She said that the fights increased as the business slowed down. She further claimed that Darlie would be doing invoices at the company and then would be on the phone shopping. So I'm not exactly sure what she meant by this. She claimed that Darlie had a temper and Darlie was the one who essentially wore the pants in the family. She continually talked, Barbara did, about Darlie's emotional state and that she even brought this up to Darren. And this is the point when she talks about how Darlie has maids there to clean the house and has people to help take care of the kids. And she claimed that the reason that Darlie was doing this, hiring all these people, was because she thought that something was wrong with Darlie. Now, Barbara and Darren would also keep an eye on the kids at the company while Darlie ran errands. Not unusual, in my opinion. Barbara then had gone on vacation, and this was around May of 1996. And when she got back, she went to go visit Darlie. And that's when Darlie told her that she had tried to commit, that she had pills out of the wrappers, not exactly sure what she meant there, and that she, Darlie, was writing a note. And then Darren happened to walk in. She put all of this stuff away very quickly so that he wouldn't see. The dog then found the wrappers and started playing with them. She said that Darlie told her that she sometimes felt strange and that things were too much for her. And she had said she had already talked to Darren about this, and she was planning on taking the 3 kids to Lubbock, Texas, and head to Cyrilda's house, which happens to be Darren's mom, and that's where she lives. But then Darlie told Barbara that she was really concerned about heading to Cyrilda's because if anything happened between her and Darren, that Cyrilda would take the kids from her. So here's my opinion on this for what it's worth. So here, Barbara is already saying that Darlie is hinting at a problem between her and Darren. Why else would she mention about something happening between her and Darren? This also further shows that she's concerned about losing her kids, that Cyrilda would take them if something did happen between her and Darren. So let's get back to the testimony. Darlie evidently told Barbara that, the neighbor kids would come over often, and she felt like sometimes it was too much, sometimes she liked it, sometimes it was too much. She never did end up going to Lubbock, um, but she did then go on diet pills because Darlie was concerned about her weight. We then learn that this is when Darlie made the request of Barbara saying, "Hey, could your mom come over and kind of help with some chores around the house?" And her mother agreed. And then Barbara took her mom over to Darlie's on the 4th, which coincides with her mom's testimony. And then she picked up Darren, and Darren rode with her to Testneck because his car was broken down and Darlie needed their other vehicle to run errands. So the next day, which was Wednesday, and this was on June 5th, so just a day before the crime occurred, Barbara again brought her mother over and couldn't remember if she gave Darren a ride to work that day or not. She then came back around 5:15 that afternoon, and because her mom's still at Darlie's, and so she has to pick up her mom, so she shows up around 5:15, and then she decided to stick around and have a beer. Then she said that her mom was rushing her to get out of there, and Darlie seemed upset and was pacing back and forth. And Barbara's like, "Hey, I know when Darlie is upset." So honestly, if she knew that she was upset and that her mom wanted to leave, why then hang around and have a beer? So, and then this next thing, this is where the discrepancy comes in regarding Barbara's testimony and her mom's testimony. And it really centers around this car. Barbara said that she had parked out in front of the house, and this is what her mom had said. But then her mom, Helena, had said something about coming down a sidewalk. Now, again, this could have just been the front walk. And her mom, Helena, like Barbara, did mention this black car that seemed to go by very quickly. Now, Helena had said that this car had slowed down and someone had gotten into the passenger side. Barbara just said it just drove by really fast. And it was the description of the car, black, it looked like a sports car. But according to Barbara, it passed them as they were already in the car and they were going to turn onto Linda Vista from Eagle Drive. So Eagle Drive is where the Routier home is, and then, down the road. But it wasn't exactly in front of the house when this car sped by. So that's where the discrepancy comes from between Barbara's mom, Helena, and Barbara herself. What I also found interesting was that Barbara mentions that as they were leaving the Routier home, she remembers waving to Darren and Dana, who happens to be Darlie's sister. Then she said later that night or early morning hours, however you want to look at it, At 3 o'clock in the morning, Barbara had received a phone call from her daughter saying, "Hey, there's something going on over at the Routier home." And when she arrived there were police and fire trucks. They were already there. The house had already been taped off. And in the front of the house, she spoke with her daughter and Dana, and then to a policeman. Now, my question is, why was Dana there? Did she ever leave the house after she arrived with Darren? I thought way back at the beginning, when Darren and Darlie were giving their initial statements, written statements to the police before Darlie was even arrested, that Dana was there for dinner, but that Darren had taken her home, which means that she would have needed a ride home and had no transportation of her own. So, how did she get there so fast? Unless she just never left. But this would also mean that she would have been a witness to the crime, wouldn't it? Or at least she would have been in the vicinity. So at this point, what I'm going to do, I'm actually inserting this in the middle because I had to go back and check out these statements. And here's what I did find. So Darlie is the one in her initial statement to the police said that Darren and Darlie, they had gotten home from the office. Dana stayed there at the house and they all just sat around and watched TV after dinner. And this happened after dinner. And then Darlie, asked Darren to drive Dana home because Darlie wasn't feeling well. This is in her original police statement, handwritten statement prior to her arrest and prior to, any of this trial occurring. So that was Darlie's statement. Darren's first statement doesn't even mention this part about Dana. His statement literally starts like, hey, once he gets back, they're sitting in what they call the Roman room, which is the den area with the TV, and talking about how they had this conversation, just him and Darlie, and that Drake got tired and they had to take Drake up to bed. So those were the two initial statements prior to any of this trial, any of the arrests, anything. But in the motion to hold Darlie without bond, and I'll have the actual show number in the show notes for you so you can go back and listen to this if you want to. This was way prior to the trial. And Darren is on the stand for this motion to hold Darlie without bond. And this is when he actually does talk about whether or not he took Dana home. And he says here that he left to take Dana back to her place around 9 o'clock. And he said that the reason that he took her home was because she didn't have a car. He then says that he got back about 9:40 p.m., somewhere in there. They ask him, "How are you sure it was 9:40?" And he says, "I know because it was before the news was on television." But then in this motion, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, you can listen to it if you want to. But another interesting part is that there is a question that is put to Darren the question is, you have not had any discussions with Darlie being angry with your activities with Dana? And he says, with Dana? And he says, yes, sir. Her sister? Dana, your sister in law? No. Never have? No. Did you ever become aware that Dana and Darlie may have spoken about what you and Dana had been doing in the past? And Darren answers no. And the question then is, that just never came to your attention? No, I have known Dana since she was 3 years old. You have flirted with Dana in the past, haven't you? And he says, flirted? No. It's like, okay, well, had you done something with Dana that others might call flirting? He says, I wouldn't think so. That's my sister in law. And then the attorney says, all right. And again, I will have the number of this episode in the show notes so you can actually listen to the entire amount of Darren's testimony. And again, this is for the motion to hold the defendant without bond. So I just wanted to interject that in here because it's important in the context of this particular information as to why maybe Dana was at the residence at 3 o'clock in the morning, at least according to Barbara. And it's at this point, after the video was shown, that the court then decides to take this 10-minute break. So, of course, after the video, everybody's got like this extra 10 minutes to sit there and kind of absorb what it is that they had seen. So now the jury has been taking a break for 10 minutes. They've just seen the silly string video and they're brought back into the courtroom and they are ready to proceed with the trial. And the direct examination of Barbara Jovell is continued by Mr. Toby Shook. And he asks, the film we just watched, were you just off camera during the interview there? Yes, I was standing just not too far by them away from the camera, but I was watching. Yes. Towards the end of that film, do you recall when Darlie Routier then walked off camera after making a statement? Yes, she did. Where did she go to? She went to my arms. Did you hug her? Yes, I have. Okay. Was she crying? No, no, she was not. You talked earlier about seeing a car when you left that Wednesday evening? Yes. Okay. After the murders, did you go to the police station and talk with them on June the 8th? Yes, I have. Did you take your mother with you? Yes, I have. Did you tell them what you had seen on that Wednesday? Yes. Okay. Did your mother also talk to the police? Yes. Well, I translated some. Okay. She talked some. You translated some? Yes. About the dark car she had seen? Black car? Yes. Okay. After Darlie Routier was arrested, did you continue to work at Testneck? Yes, I have. Okay. And did you continue to speak to her? Well, she will call for Darren at work, and when he wasn't there, we end up talking. Okay. At some point in time, I think it was maybe in August or so, did some investigators with our office, well, did they actually speak to your mother? Yes. And then speak to you? Yes. Okay. Did you agree to speak to them? Pardon me? Did you agree to speak to them? Yes. Okay. Did you tell Darren that you had a conversation with them? Yes. Okay. Did you tell Darlie? Yes. And did you agree to speak to the investigators again? Yes. And you've met with them several times, have you not? Yes, I have. Investigator Basillo and Investigator Anita Kinney? Yes, sir. You've also spoken to me on a number of occasions, have you not? A couple times, I believe. There in your house in Garland? Pardon me? We've had conversations there at your house in Garland? Yes. And since you have arrived here, we have had conversations? Yes. We have gone over what questions I was going to ask you? Yes. Did you talk to Darlie about speaking with the DA's office? Yes. And did you talk to her about being subpoenaed as a witness? Yes. What was her reaction? What did she tell you? She told me not to talk to you. What did you tell her? I told her that I already had. Okay. She told me not to speak to you anymore. And what did you tell her? That I have nothing to hide and I am willing to talk to both sides. Were you close to the boys, Devin and Damon? Yes, I was. Were they often over at your house? In the past couple of years, yes, at first, yes, I spent a lot of times with the boys, but the past couple years, I just saw them mostly at work. At work? Yes. Okay. Let me show you what had been marked as States Exhibit 9A and 9B. Is 9B, is that a photograph of Devin? That is Devin Routier, yes. And is 9A a photograph of Damon? That is Damon, yes. Okay. Tell the jury what type of boys they were. Well, they were happy, normal, rowdy, sometimes children. Damon was very smart, and Damon was also a little bit on the moody side and stubborn, kind of. And it took a lot before we got closer. And even sometimes then, if he didn't want to talk to you, he would just ignore you. Devin was very smart and loved to play video games, just like normal boys, happy playing, rowdy sometimes, picking at each other. That Wednesday, when you went to pick your mother up, did you see the boys? They were playing outside on Tuesday, and I believe on Wednesday they were outside somewhere and then they were gone. Okay. I remember maybe it was Tuesday. I know for sure I saw them on Tuesday. I saw Damon, I believe, on Wednesday. Is that the last time? Outside as we were walking out. As you were leaving? I'm sorry? As you were leaving, do you think you saw him playing outside? Yes, because it was a bunch of children, but we just left quickly. Okay. Ma'am, I need to show you one more photograph that has been admitted for record purposes. It's been marked as State's Exhibit B. I'll ask you if you recognize this photo to be Damon Christian Routier. Yes, sir. The court then says, "What was that number, Mr. Shook?" Mr. Shook says, "State's Exhibit number B." Thank you. Judge, that's all the questions I have of this witness. The court then says, "Mr. Mosty." And Mr. Richard Mosty of Darlie's defense team replies, "Yes, sir." And then the cross examination is begun. "Miss Jovell, my name is Richard Mosty. We have never met, have we?" "No, sir, we haven't." "In these conversations that you have had with the state's attorneys, have you given a written statement?" "No, sir." "You didn't sit down and write out?" "No, sir." Did As you talked to Mr. Bosillo, the investigator, did he take notes? "Yes, I have." "What about Rowlett Police Department? When you talked to them, did they take notes?" "Yes." "How many times did you talk to them?" "To the police department?" "Yes, just once." "Just once with your mother?" "Yes." "And then you talked to Mr. Bosillo. How many times?" I don't remember exactly how many times. It was a few times. Well, let's say maybe 5. 5 times? I'm not sure. Maybe about 5 times. Okay. Are those 5 times alone with Mr. Basillo? No, there was always Anita Kinney present or another. There was one time the court then interrupts and says, "Can you all hear this?" And a juror responds with, "No." The court then says, "Okay, you're going to have to speak louder than that." The witness says, "I'm sorry, there was another man. He was only there maybe a couple of times. I forget his name. He was a black man, older man, but I don't remember his name." "Do you see Mr. Basillo here in the courtroom?" "Yes, that's him right there." "Do you see Anita Kinney here in the courtroom?" "Yes, that is her over there." "And you understand that they are both investigators with the district attorney's office?" "Yes, I do." "Then how many times did you say, about 5 times, that you had met with them?" "Yeah, as much as I can remember, possibly about 5 times, maybe 6." "That is one or both of the investigators?" "There's always both." "Always both?" "Always." Now, then separate from that, how many times have you met with the district attorney's office? Pardon? With district attorney, for instance, with Mr. Shook here. "I only met with Toby and Mr. Basillo, and I maybe saw Toby. I forgot your last name. I'm so sorry." Mr. Shook then says, "That's all right." The court says, "Please raise your voice, ma'am." The witness says, "I forgot your last name." Mr. Mosty then says, "It's not a very remarkable name." Mr. Mosty then continues, "Okay." And she answers, "Maybe 3 times." "You met with Toby maybe 3 times?" "Together with Mr. Basillo." "Sometimes Mr. Basillo was there?" "Yes, and sometimes he was not there and Anita Kinney was there." "I'm a little confused. Are you saying that all totaled that you've had 6 meetings with various people, or is that 9 meetings that you are now telling me about?" "Well, I only saw, I'll just say Toby, because he came to talk to my mother." "Well, how many times and how many times do you think you've talked to before you came to Kerrville Representatives. Oh, I'm sorry. From the district attorney's office? Either the district attorney, assistant district attorney, or investigators. How many times do you think you talked to them? Well, counting here? No, before you came to Kerrville. Oh, before I came to Kerrville. Okay. Altogether, maybe it was 6 times. I don't really remember. Since you have been in Kerrville, how many times? We have talked a couple of times, I believe. I mean, going over the questions, couple times. And when would you say that you had become close friends of the Routiers? About what time? In 87. 87? Mm-hmm. And went to work actually for Darren in when? Around 92 somewhere. But you had been coworkers with Darren before that time. Yes, at Kuplex. And I guess you were around when the 2 boys were born? Yes. Did you go to the hospital and see them? Yes. And where did the Routiers live at that time? They lived on Vaughan Street. Is that close to where you live? No, I live in Garland. How far is that? Not that far, maybe 20 minutes, 15 minutes. Okay. And then do you recall when they moved? Yes, they were building, well, I believe that they sold their house and the house was being built, so they stayed with me. And where did you live? I lived in an apartment. Yes. And this would be Darlie and Darren and the children. Yes. And the 2 boys? Yes. How long did they live with you? Oh, not long, maybe a couple, 3 months. Couple or 3 months? Mhm. Would that be in 1993? Around at the time, they were building a house. How old were the boys then? They were young. I don't quite remember exactly. Okay. And were all 3 of you working at Testneck by that time? Yes. And Darren went out sort of on his own to start this fledgling company, I guess. Yes, he still continued to work a little bit at Kuplex when he opened up his business and then eventually he quit. He was still going over there to have them use the machines to drill the fixtures. And you went to Testneck after Kuplex? No, sir. I worked for ATG Electronics. Why did you leave Kuplex? I was laid off, sir. You were laid off? Yes. And why did you leave? Was it ATG Electronics? Yes, it was American Testing Group. It was run by Germans from Germany. Okay. And why did you leave there? The Germans pulled out. Okay. So I got laid off. Okay. And then your next job was Testneck? Yes. When did you go to work for Testneck? Around 92. Okay. Now, once the Routiers moved into the new house in 93, how far was that from your house? The way I drive, maybe 25 minutes. And in that 93 time frame, you saw them on a regular basis at work? Yes. And socially, in conjunction with work? And socially, yes. Pardon? And socially and work. How often? We got together quite a few times. I mean, we were together a lot of times. Yes. Well, a lot of times. Well, can you give me some, once a month or, 4 or 5 times a year? Oh, no, we saw each other at work every day, but going to the house, you mean? I'm talking about social times where you would go to dinner together or dinner at their house or go to a party together. Yeah, once a week, sometimes every 2 weeks, I don't exactly remember. Okay. Now, I'm in the 93 time frame when they first moved into that house. Not at first. I was not going to the house. Why was that? I was busy at work and I don't know why. Well, I guess Darlie was getting more and more busy as the kids got a little older. Yes, she was busy. She was doing her thing. She was going shopping, and I worked and I had my daughter, to raise. So, I mean, we had remained friends and stuff, and she had her friends and I had my friends. And we kept the contact at all times. But it's fair to say that from 93 on, that both you and Darlie got a little more wrapped up in your own lives and had less contact with each other? Not really. That's not true? Well, what I say, we still kept in touch. We still talk about the problems. She comes over to work all the time, but I'm just not going over there visiting all the time. Of course, that wasn't my question. I'm sorry. My question was from 93 on, as you got more wrapped up in your life with your daughter and your work, and she got more wrapped up in her kids as they were getting a little older. From 93 on, you all had less and less social contact, didn't you? Kind of, off and on. Yes, I would say that. And that is natural, isn't it? Well, yes, of course. How old was your daughter in 93? She was around 15 or 16. That is a pretty busy age, I know for a fact. Very. And you spend a lot of time driving 15-year-old daughters to movies, to shopping, to school, to ballet, to my daughter she was only interested in a choir for a while at school when she was around that age. She didn't really want to join anything else. And your daughter and you lived alone, the two of you? Yes. And as you would see Darlie, you would see her coming down to the office, wouldn't you? Yes. And she would bring the kids? Yes. And the kids were well cared for, weren't they? Yes, they were. They were well dressed? Yes, they were. You went in their house, didn't you? On Eagle? Oh, yes. Yes. The kids? Happy. Happy? Playing. Yes. And lots of kids over there? Sometimes, yes. As a matter of fact, that is some of what Darlie was, I got 3 of my own, and 2 boys are bringing in more. She didn't mind. Many times she didn't really mind having those children. Darlie loves children. She loved to have them over, didn't she? Yes. As a matter of fact, she encouraged her boys to bring their friends over. Yes, she had many times. Yes. And she would play with them. She would play with them. No, they play on their own. She wouldn't participate with them sometimes as mothers do. No, the kids wanted to have their friends. They just went all the time either upstairs to play or outside to play. Well, I understand that too. But then all of those kids need Cokes and sandwiches and all that stuff. Oh, yes, she tended to that. If they came in to have a drink, yes, Darlie give them drinks or popsicles. Yes. That's her kids and the neighbor kids? Exactly. Yes. She was kind to all of the children. Okay. Incidentally, you were often over at the house on Eagle. Is that right? Well, off and on. Did you have a key to it? Yes, I have for a long time. Yes. Okay. So you actually had a key to the house. Yes. Mostly I had the key because when they were going on trips, I went and checked on the house. Okay. And then I guess you at least kept up to some extent with how the boys were doing as they got older. You described them both as smart kids. Yes. And Damon may be a little more reserved. Oh, yeah. He is a little bit more stubborn. If he doesn't want to do something, he won't. And you can't really change his mind. He would be, ignoring you. And you were aware of what they were doing in terms of going to school. Yes, many times I picked them up from daycare at that time, but not from school. But at that time, I was picking them up from daycare. And what grade had Devin completed? A first grade. And did it appear to you that he had done well in school? Oh, I'll bet he did. You bet he did? Oh, yes, he was smart. Very well-adjusted child? Oh, yes, very polite. If he's away from mama, you know how children are, is a lot nicer to somebody else sometimes than around their mom. But he acted nice, even when he wasn't around his mom. Oh, yes. Sometimes he'd get along a little bit. But he was a little boy, wasn't he? Yes, a normal little boy. Yes. And those boys appeared happy, didn't they? Yes, they were happy. Yes. And they were active? Yes. Played, ran, and all the time. Ninja Turtles. Anytime something new came out, especially the Ninja Turtles. Lately, it was the Blue Rangers and Green Rangers. They wanted to be the Rangers. And Darlie went and bought them that stuff, didn't she? Oh, yes, she did. She always bought them things, yes. Whatever the current rage was, and I can't even remember what those are anymore. Yeah, neither do I. But there's always toys. They always had lots of toys. Darlie always made sure that they are clothed and fed and had plenty to play with. She actually was sort of generous to a fault with the children, wasn't she? Yes, she was. Okay. Matter of fact, you thought she was really too generous about a lot of things, didn't you? She was a very kind person. She is a very kind person. And she donated her time to school events? Yes. Volunteer work? Yes, I believe that she was going when they were in daycare. I don't know too much about a volunteer, but I know she was doing things for going to daycare. They had things, parties for the children and stuff she did. Yes. Like room mother? Yes. Or that kind of thing. Organizing parties at daycare? She was supposed to become a room mother, but I believe she pulled the children out of there. And she donated to charities, didn't she? Yes, she had. Really too much, didn't she? In your judgment? Well, I know of some. You thought she was too generous? She was generous. She was generous with you? Well, like what do you mean? Well, she gave you presents, didn't she? We gave each other presents on birthdays or holidays. She let you charge on her credit cards, didn't she? I paid her back. I know that. But you didn't have a credit card you could charge on, did you? No. And she let you? Yes, she have. Oh, yes, she have. Yes. She used it and charged to her? Yes. And so you could pay her back over a period of time? Yes, exactly. Yes, sir. Now, you saw her around those boys often enough, I suppose. Yes. And you saw how she disciplined the boys if they got a little bit out of hand, didn't she? Yes, I have. What method did she use? Sometimes she would take a timeout. Now, let's talk about that. What is a timeout? A timeout is okay, that is it. She cannot get their attention. She will make them stop. She will tell them, stop now, listen to me. And she will tell them that they shouldn't do this or that. And she would do that in a gentle but firm way, wouldn't she? Sometimes. And she told them to go stop what they were doing and take their time. Yes. And listen to me. You shouldn't do this or that. And if you don't behave, you are going to go upstairs. There will be no playing anymore. And that is how she generally did all of her disciplining of the children, wasn't it? Sometimes it was a spanking on the butt, a swat on the bottom. Yeah, with her hand. I have never seen Darlie using a belt. Right. And sometimes when they were too much and she couldn't get attention, she sometimes would squeeze their cheeks and get them to where? Look at me and listen to me. Yes, well, like a kid. And well, I was always sensitive and I always tried to stand up for those boys. No, 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 they didn't do anything. So to me, sometimes it was, just a punishment was like, no, don't do it. Yeah, but I never seen her. You thought that all of that discipline was proper, didn't you? Yes, it was proper. It was appropriate. Yes. And it was done in a loving manner. Yes. And it was done in a caring manner. Yes. And the kids expressed their love for Darlie openly. Mommy, yes, yes. And she expressed her love for the children openly. Yes. Who is Tammy? Tammy is my daughter. Okay. And Darlie bought presents for Tammy. Yes, she bought presents for all of her friends. For who? For lots of her friends. Darlie did? Yes, she was always a very giving person. Did you have occasion to meet some of Devin and Damon's friends, or just as they ran through the house? Briefly, briefly. Okay. They had a lot of friends. Yeah, mostly. I don't remember their little boy's name, but it was Mercedes' son that they play with a lot. And there was a few other kids that I seen faces, but I didn't believe, but mostly when I spend time, I spend it with Devin and Damon. I didn't The other children were not really around. You didn't pay much attention? No, no. I mean, yes, I have spoken with them a few times or something, but okay. And by 1995, in the fall, Darlie was pregnant with Drake. Had she been working pretty much full time still? Yes, she was still coming to the shop. She was pregnant, and yes, okay, we see her. And even after Drake was born, did she continue to work? No, sir. Did she continue to do the books from home? Tammy was doing I don't know too much about the bookkeeping because I never keep up with that, but I know my daughter was doing some paperwork there, and Darlie, ever so often, would come to the shop with the children and the baby, and she would do the work there. Okay. And she worked at the shop? Mhm. And at some point, did she sort of take her things back home? What things? Well, just books and records. I don't know, sir. You don't know about that? And not really, because, well, I never really cared. I don't know what they were doing in the office. I never did that. And the bookkeeping was not your responsibility? No, sir. And you didn't keep up with that? No. You didn't receive checks, for instance? When the mail came in with a check or payment, you didn't receive that? No, sir. You didn't make a deposit? I made deposits later, sometimes yes, if they tell me to make them. Who would fill out the deposit? Darlie or Darren would, Darlie mostly, or sometimes Tammy. They would hand it to you and you would drop it at the bank? Yes. Or Tammy would drop it at the bank? Mostly. Sometimes I would, or Darlie or Darren. It just depends. At this point in time, there is a lunch break that is taken. And this is also a really great time to ask that if you're enjoying this reading of the Darlie Routier trial testimony, make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. Either subscribe through your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube. And I'll have the link for YouTube in the show notes. Thank you. Now let's get on with it. And when they all come back into the courtroom, the testimony is then resumed. And Mr. Mosty then continues his questioning. And he says, Mrs. Jovell, we were talking earlier about mostly the relationship that Darlie had with her children, which you have described in some detail for the jury. And was Darren also active with the children? More or less, Darlie had to make him spend time with them. Okay. She made sure she emphasized on him spending more time with the children. She was wanting Darren to spend more time with them. Yes. Darren was working pretty hard, wasn't he? Not really. Not really? No. Were you doing most of the work down there? Well, he does the drilling. I do most of the testing and troubleshooting. Yes. Well, but am I hearing you right that you sound like maybe you carried more than your share of the load? Well, that was my duty. Darren was the owner, so a lot of times he had to be on the phone. That was his hard work. And, Darlie would help me in tests a lot of times. Well, let me take out the hard work part then and say, did Darren spend a lot of hours down there at the shop? Yes. He would come in about 10 o'clock or 11 sometimes, and he'd continue on staying open to customers. He'd stay late then. We normally don't stay late. We close up at 5 o'clock. But Darlie was wanting him to actually spend more time at home, apparently, and less at the office. Yes. Okay. And you were able to observe Darren and Darlie in their relationships? Yes, I have. And of course, you have been married, have you not? Yes, I have. And you understand that every marriage has its good days and its bad days? Definitely. And that it's unfair to take any one part of a marriage? No. To look at it? Exactly. And you would describe Darren and Darlie as having a good marriage, wouldn't you? Well, in many ways, yes. Okay. And they spent time with each other, private, just the two of them, a lot of times, didn't they? Well, I'm sure they did. Or did their time mainly revolve around the kids? Well, both actually. Sometimes they like to take trips by themselves and sometimes with the children. So it was, and Darren and Darlie were faithful to each other. Yes, they have. At all times. At all times. And there's no question about that in your mind. There is no question. All right. Let's talk then about about the work. I guess it sounds like during you worked for Testneck from 92 to 96. Yes, sir. And a lot of that time, were you the only employee? Yes, sir. And was, I mean, the day to day working and testing and working with the boards and all that kind of stuff, that was really your responsibility? Yes, sir. And Darlie's responsibility was, and I understand, office, yes, office. When we had a lot of work, Darlie would come. Well, that was before. Lately, she hadn't been there, but she would come and help me. Okay. And then Darren is just mainly being the manager of the business. Yes. But he too would help work on those boards. Well, he would help set up fixtures, sometimes on boards. Yes. Sometimes he would test them. Now, tell me what you were doing. And I am at a loss to understand what that business was really. Well, do you want me to start from when I come into the shop? I open it up? Well, why don't you try and tell me generally? If I was a customer at Testneck, what would I be buying? I test, customers would send us printed circuit boards. These are circuit boards that are manufactured by some company. Yes, some company. For instance, they are all different. For instance, what company might send circuit boards down there? Do you remember some of the customers? CompuRoot, Tri Circuits. At this moment, I can't remember. Yeah, we have customers. Yes, they send completely different. They would be huge circuit boards or little circuits. There would be tiny ones. There are different sizes, different performance of circuit boards. All right. What are those circuit boards made of? A fiberglass, the printed, it starts from the yellow room and so on. They print onto the copper, and then that is how they lay out the film. I am not familiar too much as far as that area goes, but I know a little bit. Is the board part itself made of fiberglass? Well, yes. Well, a fiberglass, copper, nickel. Okay. They have circuits and little pads and, surface mounts, which is more newer type of stuff, getting more advanced. And when you are working with those, you have that board in front of you and you are actually testing the circuits. Sometimes it's 300 of them, sometimes it's 5 boards only. Sometimes we have 1,000 of them and you have to program the board. Do you do anything to the board? Do you work on it? Do you fix it? I set up a fixture that Darren will drill, and that fixture will match exactly the board, the pegs, or whatever. The fixture is built, and with the pins in the fixture, then we set it on a tester. What is the fixture made of? Plastic. And so the fixture then allows you to test the individual circuit areas. Exactly. Because the circuit boards will look exactly like the fixture. So you have to put the fixture on a tester, program it, get the points, test points, and then I go to program. Would Darren be the one who made the fixture? He would drill the fixture and fit it to the boards. Yes, yes. And there is a shop area that you worked in. Pardon? Is there a shop area, an open area, a shop area where the boards were kept and where you worked day in and day out? Yes, normally they will come in through the office and we will bring them to the back. And we have only one big room in the back and everything is in that one room. Is it a room as big as this room? Not exactly, smaller. Okay. But that is where the actual boards and the actual testing goes on. Yes. Is there an office? Yes. Separate from that? Yes. More than one office or just one? Well, it's two offices, actually. It's one in front and one in back. Okay. And where did Darren office? Darren is the one in the back. Okay. And who officed up front? Darlie's. Okay. And that is where the financial records were kept? Yes. I believe that, yes. That's where the paperwork was done because I seen them do it there. When the mail would come in, who would collect the mail? Before, it was Darren and Darlie, but I was doing that recently. Okay. Then, if a bill needs to go out to some company, who prepared that bill? When my daughter was working, she would write out bills for whatever Darlie or Darren tell her to pay bills. So she just filled them out. And no, I'm talking about a bill to a customer, someone who had sent computer boards down. Oh, Darren takes care of that, or Darlie takes care of that. An invoice to that customer? Darlie would do that. Darlie did that? Yes. I didn't do any paperwork really. Pardon? I didn't do any paperwork. You didn't do any of the bookkeeping? No, not at all, sir. Do you know how much profit they made on those boards? Good profits. Good profits? Yes. Were some more profitable than others? Yes. Well, when we do retest, it is less money because when the customer require a new fixture and a new test, that is where the big bucks come from. All right. But some, I guess, different boards or different numbers of circuits. Oh, yes, they are all different from different customers. Profitability, different part numbers, different looks, different shapes. And do different customers get charged different rates or do they all get charged at the same rate? Different rates. Sometimes, I don't know for sure, but Darren would discuss sometimes what the job will cost. Now, over that period of time, you remember that there were computers that were purchased for the front, only one computer for Darlie. Do you remember that computer was purchased? Yes, I remember that. That was a computer purchased to do the paperwork on. There was typewriting on it, typewriting only. And did it keep invoices and things like that or records? I don't know if it kept invoices. I have no idea. Well, did they buy software to go with it? I don't know. You do not know? No, I just know I saw the new typewriter and the computer. Remember that a new phone system was needed? We don't have a new phone system. You don't remember getting a new phone system? We don't have one. Ever? We just got, when we started the shop, that is when the used bought from ATG, I remember, because they went out of business, and that is where Darren bought the used phone system. Never bought any new phones? No, sir. What about office furniture? Buy office furniture? Darlie bought a new desk. Buy fax machines? Yes, they purchased a fax machine. And all of those things were bought and placed down in the business, weren't they? Yes, a few things. Yes. And you seem like a pretty frugal lady. Would you say so? What does frugal mean? A frugal, that you mind your dollars. Yes, I do. Actually, you came from a pretty wealthy family in Poland, didn't you? Well, by Polish standards? Well, we were comfortable. Okay. And we were money coordinated. We knew how to save money. And that is your background forever, as long as you can remember. Isn't that right? Yes. And you see nothing wrong, for instance, with buying refurbished or secondhand equipment to get the job done. Do you? No, I didn't see anything wrong with that. Matter of fact, that makes good sense, doesn't it? Yeah, if it works, why not? Now, you said that you were describing the business in September, or I'm sorry, in December and January, December of 95 and January of 96. Yes, we were slow. Okay. How much were the billings for December of 1995? I have no idea. How much was collected? Sir, I don't keep the books. I don't know. How much were the expenses that month? I have no idea. And I can go through January and ask you these same questions, can't I? And you'll say, I have no idea. We were slow and the money really wasn't coming in because Darlie would come into the shop and check the books. The money that you have no idea how much it was not coming in. Is that right? There was no money because Darren was talking to me about it, saying that it's upsetting Darlie really bad. Because when he gives me my paycheck, he say, "Well, you are the only one who's getting paid now because I'm not, because we don't have no money." How much were the deposits for January? Do you know? I didn't keep track. We got some work. Don't take me wrong that we didn't have work at all. We were having some work coming, some retests. A few new jobs started coming in slowly, but not enough. And you are not the kind of person who would just sit around on the job, are you? When it was slow and Darlie and Darren would go shopping or something, I would play computer games before and answer the phones. And if something comes in, I will do the job. You wouldn't go home even if you didn't have anything to do. When Darren said that they didn't have no money, I told him that I could leave early so he didn't have to pay me. But he continued to pay you, didn't he? Well, he paid me the hours that I was there, and that was how much an hour? What I ended up making before I quit in January in 1996? I started making $10 an hour. Now, I don't mean to belabor this, but you do not know what the deposits were for January, February, March, April, May, and June for 1996. Do you? Mr. Shook then says, "Judge, I'll object. It has been asked and answered several times." The court says, "I'll sustain it. I think she has answered, Mr. Mosty. She said she did not know that." Mr. Mosty then says, "Well, the only one I asked her to answer about was January." The witness then says, "Well, I know I made deposits, but sometimes it was just $1,000 deposit. I remember maybe a few. Sometimes it was just 700. I don't exactly remember, sir. I don't stay and look at the books." Mr. Mosty then says, "Maybe I'm the only one who has not heard you answer this directly, but do you know how much money was deposited in the first 6 months of 1996? I don't keep the books. I don't know. And do you know what the expenses were for the first 6 months of 1996? All I know is that I was told there was no money. That wasn't my question. Do you know what the expenses were for 1996, the first 6 months? I don't keep the books. I don't know. Thank you. The only thing I know that I am told, Mr. Mosty then says, "Excuse me, Your Honor, I think she answered the question." The court then says, "I'll go ahead and let her answer the question. Go ahead and answer it." Mr. Mosty says, "Excuse me, Your Honor, I'm going to object. It's non responsive. She answered the question and then she quit." The court then says, "Are you satisfied with the answer?" Mr. Mosty says, "The quote, I don't know answer?" The court says, "Yes." Mr. Mosty says, "I think that was the complete answer." The court says, "All right, that is fine. Don't say anything until the next question." And at this point, we're going to pause this particular section of testimony because it's getting very long and then pick up right where we left off. But first, let's do a really, really quick recap of what we've heard through this episode. So, in this section, we find out it kind of starts off with being the prosecution finishing up their questioning of Barbara, and then it moves into the defense portion. But for the prosecution, he asks Barbara if he knows within this video that was shown, the silly string video, at the tail end of that, you see Darren and Darlie being interviewed by a reporter, and he asks a question and Darren begins to answer. And then at this point, Darlie says something and then she walks off. And we find out that Darlie left off camera while Darren was being interviewed, and she had actually gone over to Barbara to hug her. Barbara then says that she and her mom had gone to the police and had told the police about this black car that they had seen outside the Routier home. Barbara, we find out, also continued to work at Testneck for their company after even Darlie was arrested. Now, according to Barbara, she told Darlie that Barbara, had gone and spoken to the DA's office, and Darlie had told her not to talk to them. But then Barbara said, "Hey, I already did." And Darlie said to her, "Don't talk to them anymore." So at this point, the defense then takes over questioning, and he continues to kind of go along these lines and ask Barbara how many conversations that she had, not only with the investigators, but with the DA's office as well. And she says that there were about 6 of them. She is then asked if she personally took any notes. She did not, but she said that the investigators as well as the Rowlett Police Department did. We also find out that when the Routiers were having their house built, they stayed with Barbara and her daughter in Barbara's apartment. And remember, this is, 4 additional people in this apartment, Darren, Darlie, and the 2 younger boys. And they stayed with Barbara for about 3 months. Darren continued to work at Kuplex while he started up his test neck business. Barbara evidently was laid off from Kuplex and then did not go straight to work for Darren, but ended up going to work at ATG, where again, she was laid off. And it's at this point that she goes to work for Darren and Darlie at their company, Testnet. So after the Routiers move into their new home, they and Barbara, they don't spend a whole lot of time together, social time like they used to. They used to have dinners or something once a week or every 2 weeks, but life started to get pretty busy. When Barbara did come to the house, she talked about how much Darlie loved the kids, not only her own, but the other neighborhood kids who would often be at the house. She would make them sandwiches and give them popsicles and such. Barbara literally could not say enough about how much Darlie just simply loved kids, especially her own, and that she would help with the school for the boys and she would volunteer. The boys were happy, well adjusted kids, and Darlie would buy them toys and such, whatever it might be. According to Barbara, she was almost generous to a fault, not only to her kids, but to her friends and to others. And then we find out she was literally so generous that Darlie even let Barbara borrow one of their credit cards and use it to charge things on it because Barbara did not have her own credit card. And then Barbara would then pay her back. Darlie would discipline her boys using usually a timeout. Once in a while, she'd give them a swat on the butt. Sometimes she'd, squeeze their cheeks to get them to pay attention to her when they weren't listening. But Barbara even said it was all done in this loving and caring manner. We also find out that Barbara has a key to the house. And the reason that she has a key to the Routier home was that she was the one who kept an eye on it if they happened to be on vacation. She says that while Darlie was pregnant with Drake, Darlie continued to work at the test neck shop. And then she would do this, although not as often, she would do this even after Drake was born. And as far as the bookkeeping goes, Barbara really didn't know what was going on in that regard. Sometimes she would go and make a deposit for the company and just drop it off at the bank. We also find out that Darlie often asked Darren to spend more time with the kids. Barbara was then asked if Darren was working pretty hard at the shop. And she turns around and says, "Well, not really," which I kind of found a little humorous. Though she does admit that he was on the phone a lot. But we also find out that Darren would show up to work about 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning and he'd only stay until around 5 o'clock at night. So Mosty then brings up a really brief question as to whether or not Darren and Darlie were faithful to one another. And Barbara adamantly says that yes, they were at all times. Now, I'm not sure where he's going with this, but I'm sure it's going somewhere. Or, maybe he just did this to cast some doubt with the jury. I don't know. They then get into a detailed conversation about the computer equipment that they work on at TestNet. And it's mentioned quite a few times that these circuit boards are made of fiberglass, which likely will become an important point later on when it comes to evidence. Mosty then tells Barbara to they literally sit there and talk about all this equipment that Darren and Darlie have purchased for the business itself. And the thing is, this doesn't really match up. They say they buy all this stuff for the company, but then in Barbara's earlier testimony, when she was being questioned by the prosecution, it made it sound as if the equipment that they were using was barely holding on by a thread. And in the meantime, Darlie is continuing to spend money. Mr. Mosty then gets Barbara to admit that, quite frankly, she really didn't know anything at all about the business finances. She only knew what she was told by others. And this does not agree with what she said in the first portion of her testimony, where she talks about Darlie, spending all this money and how she's super concerned about this. But yet we find out that she really has no idea either way as to how the company is doing. She just is simply going by what she overhears. So that's kind of where we ended up now. And as soon as I can, we'll get to the next portion of Barbara's testimony. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I appreciate you all so much. And I cannot wait, as I'm sure you can, to see how this all ends up playing out. I mean, even though we know the eventual outcome, it really is interesting to hear what really led to that. If you have any comments, the best way to let me know is by heading to the Beach House 34 YouTube channel. This is most often the place I see them and respond, and I will have a link for you in the show notes as to how to get there. So, thank you again, and we will talk really soon.